Hello, lovely people. Welcome to a new episode of Kubefirst Live. And you know what? Recently, I was saying, like in the last live stream, that like I should probably edit the countdown, like for the videos that is like on YouTube after the live stream, so people can start right through the introduction. And I don't remember who said that, but someone told me like, no, Fred, don't do that. Like we want the countdown, we want the beat, we want the music when we start watching your videos. And people that don't want that, they're just gonna skip next to the content. Especially since I'm adding also the timestamp now on the video, I'm starting to do that. So I'm a bit of back work to fill a pretty good backlog of adding the timestamp to the show. But good news, everybody, I won't remove that nice upbeat music that we have at the beginning of the show.
Never get rid of the beats. You can't get rid of the beats.
I know. Everybody get excited about especially the new song that we have now. I saw one of our guests, John, was dancing too, and this is basically a good way to start the show. It brings some energy. I think it's just fun, and it really translates about like who's Kubefirst and what we do in those live stream. And Douglas agree with us. You're just saying like, hey, or you're just saying that you love us. Maybe it's about that. Maybe it's not just about the music. Maybe you just love Kubefirst and you love us. So again, thanks everybody for joining live. Thanks for people watching the recording. We have a pretty good show today. It's been forever that we didn't have like 4 people on the show. So with John and I already talking a lot, we'll see how it goes with like 2 more people, but we're really exciting today. We're going to mix software development with Kubernetes. And to do that, we have the amazing folks from Codezero. So I don't know, John and Mark, if you would like to introduce yourself.
Sure. I'll go first. My name is JP. I'm the, what is my title these days? Senior Director of Customer Success for Codezero. It's quite a mouthful, but basically I'm just voice of the customer / sales engineer / customer advocate. And I am located in Vancouver, actually Vancouver Island in Canada, up your neighbors to the north. So thanks for having us on.
Great to have you on. And Mark, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, and I'm Mark. I'm a developer evangelist. I help developers write software better and faster. I've been doing DevOps for a long time now, even before we actually started calling it DevOps. In sort of those days in sort of 2010, 2011. And I got my start in doing this when one of the guys I was working with looked over me and said, hey, we're never going to rack another server again. And I just love that comment because the cloud and cloud native has totally changed what we do as developers and how we can develop software. We don't need to have a server room anymore. We can do all this in the cloud, and we can do it for pennies an hour for machines. And we can have this great scalability with Kubernetes that we could never get back in the 2010, with doing it all ourselves. And so I just think that as a developer, our world has changed so much in the last decade.
God, yes.
Yeah, it sure has. It sure has.
It is. And Mark, you're from Canada too, right now. And
I am. Yeah. So I'm a little bit north of where JP is. Also in BC.
I wanted to highlight that just because I'm excited right now. Like I'm not the only Canadian here. We now are 3 Canadian on the show. So for once, the US guy is the minority here. So hey, that's going to be a Canadian show. I don't know if we're going to talk about hockey. As I said before, before the show, I'm one of the 10 Canadian that do not watch hockey, but it's part of the stereotype. It's part of like who I should be. But with that said, you know what, John? Introduce yourself. It's been forever. There's probably new people. Actually, John John from Kubefirst, introduce yourself. It's been forever that we really never did introduce ourselves, and we may have new people here. So who are you?
Thanks. I'm John Dietz. I'm one of the co-founders of Kubefirst, and serving as a CEO and regular hole filler for anything that needs to be done at Kubefirst.
I can testify to that. When you have an issue, you're just like, hey, John, do you have 5 minutes to help me? And it always ends up to be like 20 to 30 minutes, but you always start with like, do you have 5 minutes? And for those of you that don't know me, I'm Fred. I'm also a developer advocate at Kubefirst. And there's also, this side, there's also Nina, who is joining part of the show, one of my 2 cats, but she doesn't like Kubernetes that much, so she will probably move out of the room really soon. She's going to get bored about all that cloud native stuff and software development things. But with that said, I would say enough chit chat. I want to learn more about Codezero. I want people to learn more about Codezero. Who are you folks? What are you doing? What are you offering?
Yeah, just
Mark, can I give it a whirl, and then you can correct and elaborate as you see fit.
Go nuts.
Okay, so essentially, what Codezero does, we're Codezero.io, and we are collaborative microservices development. So what we basically do is we take all of your in-cluster services and we let you work with them just like they're local. So you move all of that development load off of your local environment, and you're interacting natively with in-cluster services without any sort of configuration change. And it's really, really easy to, without changing any of your local configuration, just toggle back and forth between different cloud providers, different staging environments. And essentially what we let you do is we work on that inner loop, that feedback loop. So normally the process is code, deploy, and then test. And with every cycle taking 15, 20 minutes, you have to code, then you deploy. And to get things into that combined staging environment where you can go and you can actually work with all the in-cluster resources you need or other developers' PRs, that takes a lot of time, and there's just a lot of wasted cycles. And so what we think is a better way to do is code, test, and then as a feedback loop, test, pair program, hack together. And then when you're more sure that everything actually works all together, then you go and deploy and let all the automated tests run. So what our customers tell us is that it lets them get past a lot of the obvious errors and code together really, really collaboratively. It brings back the fun when you used to sit side by side and actually hack together on things. You can now do that in a Kubernetes environment. The other thing too is that it's also, there's very little local configuration you have to do. So the other side benefit is some of our customers tell us that they can onboard new developers within an hour, as opposed to a few days of getting all their configuration set. And when they have to change between projects, they're not losing that hours or days and getting reconfigured to work on those things. It's just literally you just run a command line and boom, you're in the cluster and working away and in the flow.
Yeah, it doesn't sound like there's any corrections coming in from the other side of your camp, and I wanted to just kind of highlight what turned us on to Codezero. We've got this Kubefirst platform that we are building, and it is a complex architecture. We build platforms. Platforms are hard. And they're full of stuff that needs to live in an opinionated way in a cluster. And with Codezero, they provide this mechanism where if you have a microservice that's in that cluster that you want to be iterating on, you get to the natural flow of a developer is the developer wants to be in VS Code. They want to be they want to be writing code wherever they're comfortable writing code. And when it's time to test, from an integration test standpoint, that can get really tricky. And there's all kinds of very complex things that you can do to create developer environments to be able to create, the John Dietz cluster over there, and it's exactly like it is in production, except that it's got my stuff, and then I can put my stuff and port forward and wedge myself in. But it's got all this engineering about it, and it's just rather tough to squeeze yourself into a Kubernetes cluster the way that you want to, when really you just want to be in VS Code and be a part of the system. And what Codezero provided for us was a really frictionless way to run a tiny lightweight piece on your laptop. And then you can just kind of boop a couple buttons and say who you want to be in that cluster. And then all of the sudden, traffic that would naturally go to that cluster extends into your VS Code, just like it would if you had downloaded the entire production environment onto your laptop cluster, except it didn't require you to do all that hard work. And so the second we saw that, we were, it was a eureka epiphany, and we said, oh my God, this is really big. We have aspirations down the road of getting it more deeply integrated with the Kubefirst platform, maybe more deeply integrated with Metaphor, so that you could kind of experiment with Codezero. But for our audience that are building applications on the Kubefirst platform on a regular basis and need this problem solved, we didn't want to delay. So really, we just wanted to use our live stream as an opportunity to showcase this really cool tech. We hope down the road to have it as part of our GitOps catalog and more deeply integrated with Metaphor. But for right now, it really has little to do with Kubefirst, except that we use it and we love it, and thought that you might love it too. So with that said, we don't have too much to demo on the Kubefirst side of the house. We were hoping that we could throw the demonstration right over to your side of the wall, and you could show our audience how Codezero works.
Yeah, totally. So, John, you brought up a great point there about running things on your local machine. So I had a choice today on which T-shirt I was going to wear. I was either going to wear like one of my early Docker birthday T-shirts, or I was going to. But I decided with a vintage Hootsuite T-shirt. And so when I was working at Hootsuite, got it almost 10 years ago. Jesus. One of the problems we had is we had this PHP monolith, and we were breaking it up into microservices, Scala microservices, which are just heavyweight beasts. And all of a sudden you went from, I can run the whole app on my laptop because it's all PHP. It's not a problem. Then we went to these Scala microservices, and you'd run 3-4 of them. Okay, that's starting to push it. And, when you got 10, 15, 20, 30, 50, your machines just stopped. It wouldn't run anymore. And that whole idea of being able to, take those components and run them in a cluster that's managed and sized properly for these particular heavyweight microservices was just something that we didn't have at that time. And it meant that we had to build it all ourselves. And it was I had a whole team that was just managing the development environment so that we could actually run just the components on your machine that you're working on. And now, years ago when Narayan, our CTO, came to me and was talking to me about what he was building, it's like, yeah, look what you can do. You can take all your processes off your machine. You can put them in the cluster. This is fantastic. Because, normally we use Docker Compose, and Docker Compose is a fantastic tool, right? It's changed as a developer. I run a database and this and that and the other thing all locally, and I don't have to install all the packages on my machine. I run them as containers, right? Hook them all together. It's fantastic. But once you run a database and a cache and tracing and some other services, all of a sudden your machine starts to die. Or, right. And as much as Docker tries, Docker desktop on a Mac is not as good as Docker on Linux. They try. It sometimes it knife fight. And so it doesn't work. So being able to take those services and put them in the cluster, and they look like they're local services, is fantastic, right? So I can get these heavy things and just so easily manage and do that. And I think that that was one of the really cool things in the early days of Codezero, that I was like, yeah, this is really cool. Look what I don't need to run everything locally, but yet I can develop locally. Wow.
Right.
That's a fantastic advantage. So I want to show that, because I think, I can talk about it all day long, but the proof is actually, I think, showing that, hey, this actually works. So here, let me present.
Mark has a couple of really good videos already on YouTube that show some of these features off, and he's also very popular at dev conferences as well too. So he's got some live demos as well up on YouTube that we'll link in the show notes.
All right, zoom in a little bit. Is that a good size?
Looking good.
Looks good to me.
So I'm an old school VMux Vim developer. I don't use VS Code. I use Vim. But that's my environment, right? And so one of the great things about this tool is that it works in whatever environment you have, whether or not you're running like me on a Mac, or if you're running it in a cloud instance, or you're running VS Code. All this is going to work. So
that is so good, because when John said like, oh, your developers want to be in VS Code, I was going to have a banner and say like, hey, what about Vim? But I wasn't sure like if Codezero would work with it. So I'm like, I don't want to like destroy that live stream and like talking about something that is not supported. I'm like, now you're just telling me like it's working. I'm an happy person now.
Yeah, I believe very much in command line minimal tools. I spend most of my time in just looking at a screen that looks just like this. So let's just take a look at. So I have a cluster up and running in Civo, of all places. I can get.
We love those guys.
Yeah, they're fantastic. I just love the fact that it's one command line and up, boom, you have a cluster. Right. So as a developer who needs clusters, on demand, I can get a cluster on demand.
Yep.
And it's fantastic. And it's not running locally. So it's not. So when I used to work at I worked at Tigera, who are the makers of Project Calico, for a while, and we used to run Minikube locally. And again, it would just your poor machine just grind to a halt. But being able to just spin up an on-demand cluster is fantastic, and I think it's great. So I got a Kubernetes cluster running. I got Codezero installed, and what I want to do is I want to take what I would normally have as a Docker Compose file of a Postgres database, Redis cache, and an adminer to view your database if you're into that. So 3 kind of very regular services that as a developer, if you build web apps, you're using these all the time, right? Yeah, I can run all these locally. That's not a problem, right? Like it won't bring my machine to its knees until my Postgres database has a terabyte of data in it, or my Redis cache I'm using it a lot. Or I have to add in 5 or 6 more services. That's where Docker Compose will, and it's not Docker Compose's fault. It's just the resources on my machine. So I can go on, I can go and ask for a bigger machine, but that's expensive. Capital cost of developer hardware versus I just want a Civo cluster, which is going to cost me $60 a month, something like that.
Yep.
To run it full time all the time. If I don't turn it off and on and don't manage the costs, if I just leave it on, it's not very expensive. So, but this is a standard Docker Compose file. If you use Docker Compose, you notice it looks very similar to the ones you probably use. But what I want to do is I want to run these services in my Kubernetes cluster. I use Helm file as an easy way. John, do you guys use Helm file?
We do not. No, we use umbrella charts when we need to organize. Yep.
Right. Yeah. So same idea, right? It's just, yeah, I can do all this. I can just have a bunch of Helm commands and run all this, or I can just have a Helm file.
Yep.
I just like it. It's a tool that I found. And I'm for so long, I've just been infrastructure as code, right? So here's what I want. I want a Postgres database. I want a Redis cache, and I want add miner. And here are the variables that are going in, right? Looks just like my Docker Compose file. So I can just apply that to my cluster, and it's just going to go through each one of the different Helm charts and apply them. If you use Helm charts, this is not this is just the same as you would do it normally on command line. But they're going to be running in the cluster. So someone's going to say, "Hey, Mark, well, they're running in the cluster. How do you access them?" Right. So let's just see if they're running. No, they're pending. All right. So they have to start up. It'll take a bit, but you have two. You have one option here. You could use port forwarding with kubectl. That works until the pod that's behind it goes down. Then that'll fail. But in this case, we're going to use Codezero's consume function, which is going to allow us to consume a service that's running in the cluster and then access it as if it's a local service running locally. So let's just make sure these pods are up and running. I got add miner. Add miner's up. Okay, so that's that'll work. All right, so let's look at. So I'm going to show our brand new Codezero compose function. And so we in order to, again, make infrastructure as code. So as a developer, if you have a team and you want to deploy out Codezero to them, you want to make it so that's as easy as possible. So they don't have to have a whole bunch of command lines to run. They just need to run one thing. So far I've run Helm file apply to create my database and cache in the Kubernetes cluster. And now I want to run Codezero compose to expose those services locally. So this is the compose file. It's going to basically give me the ability to look at both the database and the cache. So make sure see if the pods are all up and running. Pods are all running. This is great. So just do czctl status.
0 out of 1 on Redis replicas, if that.
These replicas take a little time to come up.
Cool.
They'll eventually be there'll be a master or 2 replicas coming up.
Dig it.
All right, so I'm gonna just check to see if I'm actually consuming anything. Nope, not consuming anything. So I'm gonna just now, just like I would do, like with Docker Compose, it's Docker Compose up -d, right?
Mm-hmm.
So this day I'm going to do czctl compose start, and I'm going to say which file to use. This cz1 compose file, and it's just going to start up 2 consumes for me on both those 2 services, the database and the cache, running in my database, or sorry, running in my Kubernetes cluster. So now, if I want to connect to them, I can connect to them as if they're local services. So, Redis CLI host, Redis master, right? So this is just the name of the service and the namespace that it's running in, and boom, I'm connected. So let's see if we've got any keys in there. No, but let's set one. Let's do that. So get 1, turn back 1. Okay, so we're into a Redis cache. That works. And the reason I'm doing this is someone might be thinking, yeah, but maybe you are running a Redis cache locally. So let's go into the cluster. So K9S. Anybody use anything other than K9S?
Only kubectl.
That is
yeah.
That is the best tool here.
It is the greatest. I know. It is. Yeah. I how many years? Before the pandemic, dear God, 5. Yeah, I've been using this like every day for 5 years. it's the greatest. It's a great tool. So let's go into the Redis cache. So I'm just connecting directly on the machine into the pod itself. It's on localhost, so I can just do keys. If I could spell keys right, that would help. With the star, right there it is. So I can just get one. So there we go. So this is actually running in the cluster. So I'm now able to consume things in the Redis cache as if it's a local service. So now this cache can be as big as I need it to be. Right? It's only now dependent upon how big my Kubernetes cluster is. And as you saw, and John, you kind of pointed out, there we go. The replicas are up running. So I even have replicas running. Right? So you can do a lot more in a Kubernetes cluster because you have a lot more compute power and storage. So, and I can do the same thing here with my Postgres database. Right, so that's because I can't remember the name of it. So we'll see what I'm consuming. So I can PSQL. The host is going to be PSQL Postgres QL. This is just the name of the service. The user was my_user. Database is my_db. Right, standard Postgres, PSQL tool. Password was secret, and there we go, connected in. So again, Postgres database. Looks just like it's running locally.
Yeah.
Right. But it's not. It's running the cluster. And a couple of projects I've used this on. We had a data migration to do, and because of the way that the data migration worked, it consumed the Java process consumed an enormous amount of memory. And so. Or sorry, the database. Sorry, the database consumed an enormous amount of memory, and we couldn't run it locally. So we couldn't run it on a machine that was on one of our local laptops to do the data migration or to test the data migration. So we put it in a cluster, and then we sized the cluster nodes in the cluster so that they'd be big enough to be able to test out this migration, so we could actually run it. So we were dead in the water until we started using Codezero to test out our database migration, because we couldn't do it
right
without significantly rewriting how we do database migrations. And so it was much cheaper to just use a Kubernetes cluster.
Yeah, and like these examples of like having a database that your application needs to connect to or something like that, I'm sure that resonates with anybody that has to flip bits for a living. But there's also scenarios where like sometimes that service that your service has to hit isn't your service at all. It wasn't written by you. It wasn't written on your team. You don't know how to start the thing, and the README is a piece of junk, right? And in that type of a scenario, it is super nice to just be in the cluster where development is working, however that developer got it working in development, and be able to hit those services in their natural habitat that they were designed for, instead of trying to recreate everything down on your local host,
Absolutely. Trying to get things to work locally, it can be a challenge, right? Because, I'm running on an ARM64 chipset, right? Like if that service is running and it only supports AMD 64 or something else, then I can't run it locally.
Right.
There's just, and that team might be like, well, we don't need to support ARM. We run on Intel chips.
Right.
Why should we support just because you're running it on a Mac? Like we run on, we have Linux. We're Linux developers. We have Linux machines, and we all run on Intel.
Right.
And so we don't need to support you guys, like just so you can do local development. And this gets around that problem. You can run it in the cluster on the chip, the chipset that you need for the node for that particular pod. So it's incredible that you can.
Yeah, I was just going to say I like that, but there's just something wrong with what John said. Like, bad documentation does not exist, John. Like all docs and README, they're always well written. You understood everything. it's super clear all the time.
That's especially true for READMEs. I've found.
Yeah.
READMEs are always
as an engineering manager, I berate my teams on READMEs. I believe that your job is not done as a developer with a repo until someone can clone the repo, run some commands, and be up and developing.
right.
If you work with me, you'll hear me no ever end saying, "How do I make this run? Why can't I read this? Why doesn't this work?"
Right.
And you'll see tickets come in for stuff like that.
So the other thing you were talking about, Mark, where you're saying that you just want to connect it in the cluster, and you want to have it running just like it was working in the cluster. And there's the other scenario as well too, where the thing isn't in the cluster, and you just need somebody to be able to temporarily share what they're working on in the cluster, so that either they can test it out against a service already working, or somebody else can test their thing that they're working on through the cluster.
Mm-hmm.
And they're working in different time zones, they're working in different offices, and they just need to be able to jump on Slack and just say, hey, just push it to the cluster and let me go and try and hit it and see if 2 weeks ago we talked about you were going to make this and I was going to make this. Let's just see if we're close.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So maybe that's a good point, JP, that I can hand this over to you now, and you can show us how we can go about doing that. So maybe while JP's getting ready, I'll provide a bit of a preamble. So what I showed was, as a developer developing locally, I want to be able to consume services that are in the cluster, right? Databases, caches, things that I would normally run locally, I can run them somewhere else, right? This is a great way of sort of using Docker Compose is great for an easy to use development environment, and using Codezero just makes Docker Compose makes it even easier because it's not running locally. So now the question is, as JP kind of said, well, now I'm developing an app, and I want to be able to just run one of the services in that app locally, so I don't have to run everything. So I can get the app up and running in my development Kubernetes cluster. But I want to take one of those pieces, that's not necessarily like not the front end, but like a microservice that's somewhere way down in the chain. And I want to run that locally on my local machine, use my local tooling. I want to use VS Code, Vim, whatever I use. And I want to be able to do things like, I want to set a breakpoint, right? I want to go to the cluster. I want to be able to route traffic to my machine for a specific microservice. And I want to break on that, so I can see what's going on, right? Because we're always like, someone's like, hey, something's going on in the cluster. Let's go look at the logs. And you're like, my God, the logs are coming at us at 100 miles, at 100 miles an hour. First of all, you have to have, if you're logging everything, if you're logging everything, and you're just swimming in log files. But you're like, what I really need to know is, what I want to put a watch on something. I want to see, this is null. Why is this null? What did someone send me that I'm not expecting, that this is now being null? And so this demo is going to show how you can serve up something that's just running locally on your machine in your process space, and then you can do with it. You can sit there if you have a just-in-time compiling on your project, like a JavaScript project or something, or Go. You could be making changes in real time, and you can see them directly in the cluster itself. And I think what JP will show is it won't just be for it'll just be for him. It won't be for everyone. So I'll hand it over now. JP, get going.
Oh, no problem. Yeah, I was just going to say that. So what I'm going to show here is we have all of our tutorials online on our documentation site all revolve around a sample project that's on our GitHub is C60, not 0, C60. So just like Kubernetes is K8S, we just took the 6 letters out of the middle and made C60 because, you know, we're nerds like that. And what the sample project has is it's kind of trying to show you something that's simple enough, but also complicated enough. You can see how some different pieces are all working together. So in a Civo cluster, our good friends at Civo, we have an ingress that hits a web app that's a front end, and there is a core service that is, the front end is talking to a socket service. The core service is talking to and retrieving information from a Mongo database, as well as a Leaf service. And so I've got that sample project here going locally. It's also up in the cluster. And if I just go, I'm just going to run a watch. And the only thing I don't like about K9S that you can still do with kubectl is you can show services and pods at the same time. I wish there was a way in K9S that you could actually not have to keep toggling back and forth between pods and services, because half the information I want is on pods view and half the information I want is the service view. So, but here we go. You can see that in my cluster, I have, one thing I should also explain is that how Codezero actually works is we're installing, we turn your cluster into a team space by just installing in a small little controller that talks to the kubedns in the cluster, and then there's a local daemon that's running, that's doing the communication back and forth. And so it's essentially like a split DNS, a secure VPN into your cluster, and then we're doing traffic shaping. So we're manipulating the DNS or the host file in order to make all those services, even services that don't have an external IP address, we're making them just locally available on your local machine, all thanks to our friend, the etc host file. So in the cluster, what I have is that front end service, which is talking to the core, which is talking to a database, and a Leaf service. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to just double check that my daemon is running and happy. TCCL status. Okay, and it is connected to the hub. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this Leaf service and I'm going to serve a variant of that Leaf service. So we call them variants, not versions, because versions, obviously, you may want to have blue-green deployments and so forth on here. So what we're doing is we serve, we give you the ability to have local variants. And so I'm going to have a variant of core. I'm going to start it here on my local machine. So it's running locally on localhost 3010. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to serve it in with one command. I'm just going to do a compose, and I'm going to start and serve up. And you'll see here in the hub, in the API, we give you a nice little visual web UI as well. Everything is always command line first, but in the hub with one command, what I've done is I run that compose file, and that gives you a combination. It's letting you serve a variant of the Leaf service. So this is the Kubernetes version of the in-cluster service, and then this is my local variant. And what I'm doing is I'm serving that up locally, and I'm also serving it with a header. So the reason why we give you the ability to do headers is that you can actually test out and have multiple streams of people doing different development activities without impacting everybody in the cluster. So what I'm doing is the UI shows that there's the in-cluster version on 3010, but there's also, if I want, anyone can access now this Leaf service running locally on my machine by just putting a header request in for the header domain. I just use XC60 and then this domain cluster here. So right now, when I go over to the front end service here, I don't know if you can see this or not. So essentially what this is doing is this is serving up a variant of that Leaf service, and that variant is running locally on my machine. And I can toggle, and this should update.
Yeah.
And change over and grab the in-cluster service. So it says where is this? So even though it's the URL doesn't change, but this is the version running on the cluster. And then if I run that serve file, now that variant appears. It's available in the cluster, and instantly now that in-cluster version of this web app has now changed, and it's now grabbing the traffic running off of my local machine. So if Mark is in the same team space, anybody else who's in the team space, they can just join into that cluster, and then they can quickly toggle back and forth without changing any configuration file. They can just change, and they can hit that URL on that port, and no configuration change at all. They can choose to use that. In addition, if I'm just going to remove this variant, and I'm going to just put an option in the URL, and I'm going to say, make mine the default. So I can temporarily also replace the in-cluster version with the click of a button. And now by default, anybody who accesses that Leaf service, they're going to get what's running locally on my machine. And then it's super easy to tear down. I just literally just take that away, and it's gone. And if I want to undo all of my all of this and just say reset, boom, the cluster is back to just like it was before I did anything, before I started messing with it. And right
So
now,
that-
if I want to go and I have, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, so all that work I used to do in managing a development cluster, right? So that someone could just have one microservice running locally. All that's just been replaced now by Codezero Serve. That you can create a development cluster, you can deploy into it. Every time you do a merge to main, and so it's a good environment, it's in a good state, and someone will be like, yeah, I want to develop one little microservice that's way down in the stack, and I just want to run that locally, and I can just serve it up from my local machine, and I can by just putting in the as JP showed, the whatever the header is, I can use a user ID, I can use domain like that, I could which I could pull from a user's email address. There's lots, it's a header. You can do a lot of sophisticated stuff with it. I can pull that traffic just to my machine. So it means that I can create this new microservice. I can make changes to it that's running with all the other infrastructure that runs development, that runs our dev site. And I can then go show it to my, my team and say, hey, look at this. I've made that little change to this microservice. It's running on my machine. I can demo it without having to run the entire system on my laptop. Right? So I can go, Friday demos are now like, hey, look, I can just route the traffic here. Look at it. Isn't that great? Like what a great piece of work I just did. And I'm just running that one microservice, and it could be, it could be Go, it could be Rust, it could be, JavaScript, whatever, Python, whatever it is. And it's just running there.
Yeah.
And if I wanted to, then if JP and I wanted to work together on something, right, I could get the traffic from that service, from the service running on his machine as well. So I could actually run one service on my machine, and he could run another service on his machine. Can you imagine trying to do that, like just from a network perspective, not being next to each other? Like
Yeah.
we're in the same time zone, but in the old days, you'd be like, yeah, we're just next to you. I'll just, open a port and I'll give me your IP address, right? Like that's gone. Like we don't do that anymore. We're not on the same networks. So now you're talking about being on the same VPN, or, and any security people are currently cringing about what developers do so that we can do our job, right? It's like, oh yeah, we'll just open up ports in a firewall. It'll be fine. Everyone will be cool with it. So this layered network that Codezero puts on top of Kubernetes and your local machine extends to JP's machine, my machine, the cluster, so that we can route traffic to the different services based on the header, and they show up where we want. And it doesn't, in fact, my product manager is still looking at dev because they're going through the cycles on testing out the new stuff that we just built. it's not impacting them at all because they haven't put any headers in.
Right.
So they're getting what is currently in production, and they're testing it there, and it works for them. And I'm getting traffic from my machine and JP's machine and other people on our team, so we can create this sophisticated mesh of different services running in different places. And we don't have to do these sort of hokey workarounds of, can you tell me what your IP address is?
Right.
In order to get there, right? It's just we're using what Kubernetes does. It's a service. It's a Kubernetes service. Right?
So I have
an interesting thing. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, John.
I'm sorry. I was just going to ask. I have irresponsible questions about production. Are you ready?
No.
Don't do it. Don't do it.
Okay. We have people who keep asking us about that, and it's like, you know what? Okay, it's built for dev tooling because we have a policy engine we're working on that supports OPA and RBAC, but there's a more robust policy engine coming that actually also does secrets management and gives you a whole bunch of hooks, because we've got a patent on that as well, so that we will allow you, right? Because right now we're intended for use with dev and staging, and we had some people who say like, oh my god, it'd be amazing to be able to go and troubleshoot a production issue and just say
naturally,
oh, there's a problem with Stripe, and go and grab on there, and it's like, you could, it would work. Is it a good idea? No. But let's put it this way. Actually, I'm going to stop and let Mark take over that part of the talk on there. But we don't recommend it.
Roger, thank you, appreciate it.
but the reality,
I know it's right there,
right?
So we are in the process of getting our SOC 2 certification. We have a patent. We're working on building out this end, because we're in the engine. So here's the sneak peek into the roadmap, is that we are going to be supporting. Right now, we support RBAC. We're going to be supporting OPA, and we're putting in roles and policies and groups, but also secrets management. So for example, like right now, this database is running in the cluster. And right now I can consume it, and as soon as I've consumed it, now I don't know if you just noticed in the host file, instantly it became available. I ran MongoDB, Mongo shell to connect to the MongoDB, and if I run that same command now, no credentials, no nothing, I'm just right into the database with command line access.
Yeah.
So that is the real-time secrets injection that's coming. It's not there right now, and like I said, you could use this, and the nice thing about it is that it's super fast, and you can basically turn it on and turn it off really, really quickly without having to go and manipulate production environments.
Yep.
Because we wrote our HA proxy and our tunneling and so forth from scratch to be really, really fast and be listening for changes every millisecond. Most networking and most proxies and most load balancers and so forth are built for resiliency. You set them up and then they just never change. Whereas we're a development tool, so we're able to do these things so fast. Like I can turn on that access, I can turn it on, I got a database. I turn it off, no database. I turn it on, I got a database. And you'll notice as well too, while I'm doing, and if I'm serving up a variant of that as well, or serving up my leaf service in the cluster in real time, you can see that we're actually creating ephemeral pods and services attached to those, and then destroying them, and then we're creating them and destroying them. So we make it super, super fast. And again, that's developer tooling. It's not, production network routing, but that's the secret sauce. It's that traffic shaping, and it's really, really fast. And it plays nicely with every VPN that we've run across so far. Not to say that there's not one that we haven't run across yet, but
there's always one around the corner. But that's great to hear.
All right. I'm sorry, Mark. I think I interrupted you when you were talking about the reality is.
Yeah. So and maybe we can just look at dev, right? The fact that, if you're trying to debug a problem and you're not sure where it is, right? You're looking at the logs. The logs are not providing you the level of granularity that you want. I can go now and I can serve up that one component locally on my local machine. I can have it create a variant just for me, and I can put a header in just for me. So I'm just going to get that traffic. And then I can set a breakpoint, and I can break the code right there. And I can go and watch, I can look at the values of those particular variables. And I can then step through the code because it's running in my process space. Yes, if it's a web app, it's going to hang, but that's what you expect, right? You're debugging code. So you're doing it in kind of, you're able to now debug in the dev cluster where you have the compute and the data, and it's set up the way that you want. It's not just sort of, three customers in the customer table and 4 users in the user table and, 8 transactions. You're talking, it's set up to test and to work for your organization and your team. So now I can set a breakpoint and I can just step through it. Just, we've talked, remote debugging has been around for a long time, like since I started doing this, right? And it was never easy, ever.
Right.
Like,
exactly.
Local debugging has always been relatively, the old days of using GDB were a little bit more convoluted, but the idea of having your code and attaching to a process and being able to step through it works pretty well in your environment. But remote debugging never did, right? Like, you'd have to open up ports to a specific server running somewhere. Now we're in Kubernetes. Like, how does that work? And I'm sure maybe someone can write in the comments that there is an easy tool out there to do this. But what I'm saying is we do remote debugging locally because we bring the process to run locally, and you can use all your local tools. You're already set up to do local debugging, right? All developers, we can all do local debugging in our IDEs. We all have all that set up.
I should trust an internet.
I say that, and it's like, every now and then I ask one of my developers, is like, oh yeah, let's just debug that on your machine, and it doesn't really work very well.
Right.
I don't really have it all set.
What jumps out at me also is that scenario that's familiar enough to me of the intermittent issue in development, right? You've got that circumstance that you don't understand fully. You've got a release candidate. It's mostly solid. You test it, it tests well. And every once in a while, somebody will complain of some intermittent circumstance, and you'll go to the logs, and the logs will say, null pointer exception, null reference exception, something like that. Something is not set that you expected to be set. It blew a gasket. And you can look at the code and look at the log and come up with theories about what's going on in there. Or you can put a breakpoint on that line of code and run development off your laptop until that clause is hit, and then see in real time in that thread what the memory state was of all the objects in that scope. And that alone is just an enormous evolution in software debugging.
And you can do it with that user because you're like, but it always works for me in development or in production. Like, it's like my user, but their user account is somehow in a state that you're not, like you said, something's null. And it could be because it was created 10 years ago.
Right.
And their user ID, like I worked with a guy at Hootsuite who was user ID 1. Right. You imagine what the database looked like at user ID 1 versus user ID, whatever they're at now, 10 million plus, right? Like they don't even use numbers anymore. They're now UUIDs, but the database has gone under an enormous transformation in that time. And so there could be one piece of data that's way over deep in a permissions table somewhere that,
exactly,
everyone else has except for them. And you're like, but, and so, they can route that traffic from their browser to your machine, and you can set the break, and you can go, that is null.
Yeah.
And then you can ask the question of why is it null? How could that be? And then now you're working from a place of actually being able to fix it, and then going through and finding it. And then when you do fix it, you're like, hey, look, yay.
Right. Yeah. You know what to guard against. You know what the scenario was. You could maybe even write a commit with a decent commit message.
I just got off the phone before this call with a dev manager, and he's only got a team. He's one of 8 developers. He's a small dev team. They do contract work there in Brazil. And he said, every 2 weeks, I have like 20 PRs, and I've got 8 different devs and 8 different combinations of versions and services. And I'm going through it, and I'm trying to actually make head or tails of it. And I can't figure out why this particular PR has got this conflict. And he said, what this allows me to do is literally when I go through and I do all of my reviews, if I have any issues at all, I just hop on Slack and I just consume and serve. We just work through it, right, using the developer's local code and my version of the code and the in-cluster services. And we figure out, oh, okay, you've got a dependency on this, because out of his 10 PRs, he may have 3 or 4 that are all working on similar kinds of issues, slightly different versions of things. Their local resource has something slightly different. And he said, like, when he saw the promise of this, he's like, it's going to help me get my Fridays back, because I'm just going to be able to go through and just I can combine my one-on-ones with like pair programming with the team.
Right.
So I was on the idea of pair programming. So Nathan Harvey, you know Nathan, don't you, John?
I don't know Nathan.
Oh, so he's the developer evangelist at Dora.
Okay.
So you've probably seen him at
Dora one of the
conferences.
Yeah.
And so I asked him the question, like, how do you, so Dora metrics, one of the classic one is lead time for change, right? How do you get, teams that are efficiently getting, pull requests into production faster, do better, right? We know that because the change is smaller, the the impact on the code is smaller, the risk is smaller. So the faster you are at that, the better. So like, so I was asking him, well, how do you speed that up? He's like, well, if you're doing pull requests, right, that's always going to be slow, right? Because someone has to review it. Pull request review, someone has to review it. But one thing he was saying is that teams that do pair programming, can either eliminate or greatly reduce PR review time, right? And so here you go with Codezero and the idea of being able to do pair programming remotely in different places, right? So now you can help with dealing with one of your Dora metrics of getting lead time for change down, right? Because before, today you can't really do pair programming because we're all remote. Well,
Right.
Not every company's remote, but like a lot of us work remotely, and so you can't do that in the same way. But now with Serve, all of a sudden you're like, hey, look, I can make this work in this way. Like, so I can
even
make my team more efficient by giving them giving them tooling like this.
Right.
even if you were in the same location. I mean, like, I hate working with someone else's computer. So now being able to use my own stuff with my own configuration to like do the pair programming and then like help someone else, it's just like makes my life so much easier. I mean, I'm lost on someone else's computer.
Oh, absolutely.
I just wanted to highlight just a couple of little resources before we go. Just letting folks know that there is, if they want to get started, it's free to sign up. You can use a team of up to 5 in your in an organization and multiple in a team space. So you can just go and you can just sign up using your. Right now we support GitHub login or your Google login. There's more coming. We're going to be integrating Auth0 in to support a lot more. But you can use the links here for a Kubernetes quick start. We have Civo. They give you a free $250 credit, I believe, to go and get running. But we have instructions for getting started with Amazon, with Azure, Civo, DigitalOcean, GKE, we're Kubernetes agnostic, and there's a good guide just talking you through how to get set up on the team space, how to install in your cluster, and then that sample project that I was showing here. There's some really nice tutorials that take you through really simple setup, and then how to go. And most people start off just by consuming some local resources and bringing them down locally. But then we also talk about how to use wildcards, and then some advanced topics like mounting an in-cluster volume for use with Codezero, and then some more advanced topics about, now starting to actually get into pair programming. So local developing using serve, how to use those headers to propagate and through this your traffic, how to combine getting really fancy and using combinations of consume and serve, so you can bring down in cluster resources and work with your local tooling. You can also share up a variant of a service that you're working on. And then we talk about header propagation and how to work with state and data conflicts. And as always, we are CLI first, so there is a full command line reference available, and our GitHub is C60. The sample project is right here. There's some other useful information talking about how to work with that. But I should also just ask. And also Mark, you'll recognize the dulcet tones from these videos. He's made some really nice little snack-size videos. We like to call them on how to use Codezero serve, Codezero consume. I think they're about 3 minutes long.
Nice.
There's some longer. There's actually a great fireside chat with our CTO Narayan Sinani and Dinesh, the CTO of Civo, talking about how Civo has used it for one of their multi-team projects. So they were developing a machine learning language transcription service, and so we have their use case featured on the website. We also have a great case study from one of our other teams. They work on AI and machine learning for financial services. So they're used by big enterprise corporations. Actually, Netflix use them internally. They provide machine learning about Netflix's own internal financials. So all of their operations people just use natural language to talk to their data and say, show me the EBITDA for the last 2 quarters of 2022 and 2023. And so they're not able to run any of those machine learning services locally. They have to run in cluster. Right. And so their whole team just comes in and they start their day by saying cctl consume, and then end of the day by just resetting, and then they're done. So
very neat. And I can vouch for the Codezero team in terms of companies that might be interested in checking out Codezero and exploring it and seeing how it works for them. Kubefirst was one of those companies. We did have those questions, and we were able to reach out to the folks over at Codezero, get our questions answered, get meetings set up, because our questions are weird questions that have never been seen before. Like, well, what if you're creating a cluster that creates a cluster that creates a cluster? What do you do then? And they're there for us. And so the support's there. The product, I think, just has an incredible vision behind it. The story of being able to more frictionlessly be a part of your development Kubernetes cluster as a locally debugging developer is just a tough story. It's a tough nut to crack. And I think that the angle that you guys took with it was exceptionally well put together. So yeah, I don't know. I wanted to show it to my audience, the Kubefirst users. I thought they would appreciate just kind of having this in their bag of tricks that they can pull from. It was really great having you guys in, and appreciate you showing a little bit of a demo. And it goes much deeper than what we showed today. So very much worth checking out.
Yeah. Yeah, I like everything I've seen. I didn't say much, but I was just enjoying like the demo and the explanation. So, good job. Thanks for being in the show. Always a pleasure to have knowledgeable and lovely people on the show. And on that note, folks, if you're listening to us and you want us to invite specific companies or technologies that are related to your cloud native journey, you want to learn more about something, we are always looking to have guests on our show talking about great technology that resonate with us. And also, if you want to be on the show and you have something to demo to the audience, please let us know. And before we end the show, I think there's something about DevOps Day Seattle. Codezero, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about that, but you're sponsoring DevOps Days Seattle.
Yeah, both Mark, myself, as well as our CTO, Narayan Sinani, are going to be down in Seattle next week at DevOps Days. We're one of the sponsors of DevOps Days, so we are taking ferries and planes, and actually we're taking a train down to Seattle for the drive down. We're taking a page out of your president's handbook, and we're taking Amtrak and heading on down to Seattle. So
That's
we'll be
neat.
staying in the area. Yeah, we've heard good things, so we were like, yeah, let's take the train. We haven't done that before.
Kubefirst was born on a train. The idea of Kubefirst was born on a train ride to Datadog Dash back in 2019.
Cool.
So make sure you have some good tech talks on that train. There's something about the environment. It's just right. It's just right.
Nice.
Cool.
Nice. So we would love to see anybody who's interested come by and have a chat with us, give you more hands-on demo, talk to you a little bit about some of the. I love going to these to like the DevOps days in particular, because no two people have the same infrastructure. There's so many weird and wonderful ways that people are implementing microservices and Kubernetes and hybrid environments and things. So the more we get a chance to talk to people, the more we get to learn about real world use cases and things that we should consider in our roadmap. So always happy to chat.
Awesome.
That's awesome. And thanks for sponsoring. I've organized a couple of conferences in my days, and without sponsors, it's already hard to do with sponsors. So without sponsors, that's a different story. So that's amazing. And I always love DevOps Days. This is our first time on the show. There is something that we do before ending the shows, and it's a fresh joke or a developer dad's joke, even if I'm not a dad. So, gentlemen, tell me, what? Sometimes I cannot even go through the jokes; they're so bad. But what does a ghost who used to be a developer say?
What is a ghost that used to be a developer say?
I will take this as
nothing.
I don't know. So a ghost who used to be a developer say, Boolean. And on that note, people, I bid you adieu. I wish you a great 2 weeks. See you in 2 weeks, actually, for the next live stream. So have a good day, everyone. And thanks again, GP and Mark, to be on the show. That was a nice one.
Thanks, guys.
Have a good one.